Much of Georgia's land is publicly owned. In this episode, we'll take a look at some areas you might not be familiar with, from lesser-known National Wildlife Refuges to state parks and wildlife management areas. Coming up on Georgia Outdoors.
Funding for Georgia Outdoors has been made possible by a grant from Mary Hall Singleton and by the Imlay Foundation.
From boggy wetlands to sandy beaches, from startling mountain vistas to babbling forest streams, Georgia has a diverse and beautiful landscape to explore. And from public parks and historic sites to wildlife refuges and national forests, much of this land is available for public use.
Public land is defined as any land that's owned by an entity of government. That might be city government, county government, state government, or federal government. About 8% of Georgia is actually publicly owned.
There are lots of activities to enjoy on public lands: fishing, hunting, hiking, kayaking, bird watching, and nature photography, to name a few. Most of the public land in Georgia is owned by the federal government.
We have national seashores, national monuments, and national parks in Georgia, as well as national recreation areas. And of course, with national forests, we have the Chattahoochee and Oconee National Forest. The Chattahoochee National Forest being up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and the Oconee National Forest being in the middle Georgia. Most of the Fish and Wildlife Service lands in Georgia are known as National Wildlife Refuges, and we have a great system of National Wildlife Refuges here in our state.
Since Theodore Roosevelt designated Florida's Pelican Island as the first National Wildlife Refuge in 1908, this system has preserved more than 96 million acres of prime habitat across the U.S., including 548 refuges and 36 wetland management districts.
National Wildlife Refuges typically manage to benefit wildlife species, but also manage for access by the public for hunting and fishing and hiking and bird watching.
Nestled in Georgia's southeastern corner, the Okefenokee Swamp is the largest wetland of its kind in North America. This great swamp attracts more than 400,000 visitors a year. And while the Okefenokee is perhaps the best known of Georgia's 9 wildlife refuges, the other 8 host a dizzying array of creatures and ecosystems. Not far from the Okefenokee lies Banks Lake, a shallow blackwater pond that provides some fantastic scenery in a tranquil setting.
The Banks Lake National Wildlife Refuge is located just on the edge of Lakeland, Georgia. It's about 4,000 acres. The lake itself covers about 1,000 acres. The lake is an old impoundment of a creek bottom that has been drained and refilled, but today exists as a cypress pond.
Banks Lake is a good spot to witness the spectacular beauty of a cypress swamp without having to travel too far off the beaten path.
When people come out to Banks Lake, what they're going to see is an old mill pond. It's full of cypress trees, moss-draped cypress trees. There's a good amount of wildlife in here, American alligators, great egrets. We get some use from osprey, at times eagles, and it's popular, particularly with the local community, for fishing. The fishing in the lake is quite good, especially for a more tannic water system, a black water system.
Several national wildlife refuges are located on the Georgia coast. These coastal refuges make up a chain of protected lands called the Savannah Complex. Each refuge in the Savannah Complex presents a unique opportunity to experience the natural wonder of Georgia's coastal ecosystems. Acquired by the Navy in 1800 as a source of live oak timber for shipbuilding, Blackbeard Island is Georgia's oldest national wildlife refuge and is one of the oldest in the country.
Blackbeard Island has been in federal ownership since the early 1800s when it was acquired by the Navy Department, mainly for the live oak stands that are here we use for the naval stores to build ships. It also was imported in the late 1800s and early 1900s as a quarantine station for yellow fever epidemic. It's open year-round from daylight to dark. Of course, access is by boat. There are several outfitters in the area that you can contract with to bring you out here if you don't have your own boat. We have wildlife observation, photography. Of course, you can hike our roads or you can bicycle the roads anytime during the daylight hours if you want to. We have a lot of beach use, a lot of fishermen that come in the area, and saltwater fish in the creeks around the refuge. During holiday weekends, we get a lot of families out and come to the south end, mainly on the beach. Blackbeard is pretty typical of the barrier islands along the Georgia coast, as it's eroding on the north end of the island and accreting or building up on the south end. And that happens as rivers deposit silt and sand out into the ocean. As it comes down the coast, it builds up the beaches, but because of various practices, inland damming of rivers, deepening of harbors, those types of things, we get less and less sand, and storms also erode the beaches. You've got the boneyards along our beach here that at one time used to be upland habitat, and now because of some of the erosion, you've just got skeletons of trees that are out in what looks like in the middle of the beach.
Though access to the island is limited, in order to control the explosive deer population, Blackbeard hosts 2 archery-only deer hunts per year. Participants are offered the rare treat of camping overnight on this well-preserved barrier island.
This year is the 61st year of the Blackbeard Archery Hunt, and it is the oldest managed archery hunt in the refuge system. This 3-day hunt, we've got 130 hunters here. Just came by boat, and they camp in our campground, and they're allowed to hunt for deer and feral hogs for 3 days using only archery equipment.
We came from close to Gainesville, Florida. My dad's been coming up to Blackbeard Island for 35 to 40 years. We've been coming up here probably 15 years.
It's a beautiful place, and we enjoy coming up here. My son's come, and my daughter-in-law, and I've had grandkids up here with us. It's a great place to hunt.
I think the longer you've been coming, the more elaborate your campsite becomes, because you start missing some of those comforts of home, and you decide, well, next year I could do this and do this a little better, and before you know it, you've got these large tarps and large tents, and maybe one year you hit a rainstorm, and so you decide to do something better. And we've got some really elaborate camps that are set up, and it takes them quite a while to set everything up the way they want it, but they really do a nice job.
Well, we've got our tent and our little camp awning there, and we got some military cots that we put up trying to get everything in out of the weather, so if we do have some rain tomorrow, we'll be set.
This is not just a recreational hunt on Blackbeard. They're doing us a favor in managing the deer herd, because it is a barrier island. It's an isolated population, and we don't want the herd to die off from some sort of disease, and we don't want the vegetation to show a browse line from overpopulation. So we allow hunters to come out and help us control the herd size by participating in these archery hunts.
I think it's just the camping and the getting away with the guys, and of course the hunting, you know. And there's more deer here than there are at home, so, you know, good place to go and have fun.
I like it because of the primitive ways and the palmettos and the small deer.
Pretty much what you see is what's always been here, and it will continue to be this way. And that's another important aspect of National Wildlife Refuge, is when we own a piece of property for the American public, it will remain that way in perpetuity. There's no plans to sell it or ever get rid of it or develop it or allow any kind of development or sell parts of it off. It will always be this way for your children and your children's children, and that's really the importance of the National Wildlife Refuge system, is our 95 million acres that we own around the country, and in Puerto Rico and Alaska and Hawaii will always be the way they are now.
Wolf Island and Wasau are also barrier islands protected as National Wildlife Refuges. With 6 miles of beach and 1,900 acres of pristine maritime forest, Wasau offers visitors a good chance to explore a barrier island that's been untouched by development over the centuries.
Wasau has the least disturbed maritime forest, surely in Georgia and possibly on the East Coast. And there are some loblolly pines on this island and slash pines that reach very close to 3.5 to 4 feet in diameter and over 100 feet tall. So that sets this island apart from almost any other island on the Georgia coast. And because of the lack of disturbance, several bird species such as painted buntings reach their greatest densities here on Wasau practically of any place on the East Coast, if not the highest density. We have a reasonable population of diamondback rattlers on the island. Wasau has one of the longest standing turtle programs on the Georgia coast. They've been monitored and protected continuously since 1973 by the Coretta Research Project, which is administered by the Savannah Science Museum. Most of the public entry to the islands from the north and south end, and people anchor their boats off, and then they'll wade in and have a picnic and spend the day. And that's the majority of the public use that we have.
Not all of Georgia's coastal refuges are islands. Harris Neck is a converted World War II airfield, reclaimed by nature.
This is a real jewel of a refuge, very small, just a little over 2,800 acres. Even though the refuge is under 3,000 acres, we've got about 1,000 acres of high ground, and it's intersected by some very interesting roads. Many of the roads, in fact, our wildlife drive is superimposed on the remnants of the old Harris Neck airfield that was active during World War II. And it'll take you by several freshwater impoundments or pools that we've created, and you'll see a diversity of habitat types, and that's what makes this refuge so attractive, such a wide variety of birds.
If you're interested in birding, biking, or hiking, the old roads and runways at Harris Neck provide a good chance to experience a variety of unique habitats. Harris Neck is a great place to see egrets, herons, and wood storks. In fact, the refuge is home to one of the healthiest populations of nesting wood storks in Georgia.
Well, our premier, most popular species, of course, is the wood stork. Not only is it large and easy to see, but it's an endangered species. It draws a lot of attention, and we're quite proud of the fact that we pioneered the first artificial nest platforms for storks here. But fortunately, our storks are now moving away from those structures onto cypress trees that we also planted in hopes that they would transition from the platforms to the less maintenance of trees, the grouping of clusters of cypress that are on man-made islands that we also created. And these birds will either be nesting there or just loafing there most of the year. It's possible even in the middle of the winter to see some storks here at Harris Neck.
A relaxing way to experience the refuge is by bicycle.
Harris Neck National Wildlife Refuge is a fabulous place to ride bicycles. I'm here with the group. There's plenty of room to ride. It's flat. The rookery is amazing, this time of day particularly, because the wood stork and the herons and all the birds are coming to roost.
The largest refuge on the Georgia coast is the Savannah National Wildlife Refuge. Built around the Savannah River, this protected area consists of more than 25,000 acres, much of which was once used for rice cultivation.
Savannah Refuge came into public ownership in 1927, and it was an old rice plantation, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service acquired that property, and it's been in federal ownership since that time.
Just over the state line, a scenic loop winds through the old rice fields, offering a chance to see migratory waterfowl and other wildlife right from your car window.
On Savannah Refuge, we have about 2,000 to 3,000 acres that was an old rice plantation, and we've taken those areas and continue to maintain the impoundments. That means that we flood the impoundments during the wintertime so the ducks will have an area to nest and also to winter over for food.
While some refuges are left pristine, others are closely monitored and habitats are managed by wildlife biologists. One method of such management is prescribed burning. Today, these technicians are performing a controlled burn.
Now, what we're doing is we're preparing to flood for waterfowl. That's our primary objective out here is migratory birds, our waterfowl management. And we're decreasing the detritus so the waterfowl can feed on the seeds produced in the impoundment. One of the most rewarding, rewarding benefits of being a wildlife manager is seeing the wildlife respond to management tools or management scenarios that you apply. So when we flood this up and get 5,000 or 6,000 ducks in here, that's the rewards for me.
Wildlife refuges are not the only protected lands on the Georgia coast. Cumberland Island, our largest and southernmost barrier island, is a protected national seashore. North of Cumberland, other islands such as Wasau and Sapelo are owned and managed by the state of Georgia.
Most state lands in Georgia are either wildlife management areas, state parks and historic sites, state forests, or state natural areas.
Of all state-owned lands in Georgia, perhaps the most visited are our state parks and historic sites.
The mission of Georgia's state park system is to protect the natural and cultural resources that we have here, while also offering a balance for recreation and education. Georgia's state parks tend to be bigger than your county and your city parks. We typically have campgrounds and hiking trails and a lot of different outdoor activities. Now, historic sites, they protect the cultural resources that we have here, anywhere from ancient Indian mounds to battlefields.
Many state parks are built around amazing geologic formations.
If you're in the North Georgia mountains and you only have a little bit of time, I would suggest going to Amicalola Falls State Park. It's the tallest waterfall this side of the Mississippi River. It's magnificent at 729 feet. And there is a nice trail and a boardwalk and a lot of steps that go up to the waterfall, and you can get a really close view of it, but also be safe. I think if you have a good bit of time to spend in the North Georgia mountains, I think one of the parks I'd start at is Cloudland Canyon State Park. It's in the northwest corner. The views are spectacular no matter what time of year that you go, and there's trails all along the rim, and then there's also trails down into the bottom of the canyon.
If you're in southwest Georgia, you'll find a state park built around a very different type of canyon.
I would say the most unusual state park that we have in Georgia is Providence Canyon State Park. It's in southwest Georgia near Lumpkin, and the reason I say it's unusual is it's kind of a man-made park. The erosion in the area that created this canyon actually came from poor farming practices in the 1800s. And today people can hike down into it and they see the different colors of the soil. It's really pretty and unusual.
No matter what state park you visit, you'll always find an interpretive ranger on hand to answer your questions and provide assistance.
When people go, I suggest that your first stop be, of course, at the visitor center or the park office. And ask what's in the area. Ask them where they think you should start off if you've never been before. You know, what are the must-see places at that park? And you can find out about the wildlife that's in the area.
While the primary mission of state parks is to offer visitors a chance to experience some of the unique outdoor recreation opportunities our state has to offer, wildlife management areas exist for a different reason.
Our state wildlife management areas are sort of a state version of the federal National Wildlife Refuges, in that the lands are open and available to the public, used for hunting and fishing and for conservation purposes, but managed to benefit our wildlife habitats.
Wildlife management areas can be found across the state. In southwest Georgia, Chickasaw-Hatchie WMA is built around one of our lesser-known swamps.
Chickasaw-Hatchie Swamp is in southwest Georgia, immediately south of Albany, about 15 miles. It's a beautiful swamp that originally encompassed about 32,000 acres, and we have been able to purchase about 20,000 of that original 32,000 acres. When it was purchased, we knew that we had one of the most magnificent swamps anywhere in the country. When you look at contiguous wetlands, it's second only to the Okefenokee. We have two primary habitats. The upland, as people drive in, they're going to see a lot of planted pines on most all of the uplands. The second most prominent habitat type here is a beautiful aquatic system. It's a riverine system. There are 3 major creeks. They flow into the Chickasaw-Hatchie Creek, and this flows into the Itchaway-Notchaway, which eventually goes into the Flint River. Chickasaw-Hatchie is one of those areas that is also rich in abundance of game animals. White-tailed deer, for instance. We have an excellent white-tailed deer population in here. We also have wild turkeys, and it is outstanding. With 50% of this area in bottomland hardwoods, that's where the turkeys like to go, and it's outstanding turkey hunting in here. There is fishing. It's more wilderness-type fishing. It's not developed, it's not managed. People will have to come down, they'll have to do a little bit of hiking, and depending on the water status that particular year. If we've had good water, they're going to be able to find some of these little holes, and they can find chain pickerel in these holes. They can find redbreast, channel catfish, there are bass. This is unspoiled, it's unpolluted in here, and so the quality of fish in terms of eating is outstanding.
One of Georgia's newest and most accessible wildlife management areas, Paulding Forest near Atlanta, also holds important habitat for aquatic species. We followed biologist Brett Albanese on a survey of some of the unique fish species found in Raccoon Creek, a trout stream that cuts through the center of the property.
When we purchased the land, we wanted to get a really good idea of where all the imperiled species lived within the property. And the idea here is that we can get kind of a baseline of how the populations are doing now, and that's something we can monitor. We've done some seining out here in the creek here, and we're trying to document the distribution of all the fishes in Raccoon Creek, but we're really focused on 2 of the imperiled darter species, the Etowah darter, which is a federally endangered darter, and the Cherokee darter, which is federally threatened. And they primarily live in these riffle habitats. It's endemic to the Etowah River Basin. There's 5 main tribs where it lives, and this is one of them, Raccoon Creek, and it's a very healthy population. And in fact, this is the only population that occurs that we know about downstream of Lake Allatoona, so it's one we really want to protect. For the darters, we really target the riffle habitats, the real shallow, swiftly flowing areas. And the best thing is to have 3 people, 2 of them holding the net, and then I'll come down and do my little dance through the riffle, and I'll kick over lots of rocks because a lot of times the fish will be hiding under there. We documented actually several new populations of the Etowah darter, several new sites, and we put them much further up in the watershed than we knew they occurred. For me, it's enough that we're going to protect this beautiful little darter, and that excites me, but the kinds of things we need to do to protect this species will also protect water quality. We're protecting a forest here that people use for hunting. We're protecting the entire stream and all the game fishes along with it. So it's not people versus endangered species. We're really kind of tied with these things, and if we can keep the Etowah darter around, I think we're going to have a nice place for people to live into the future. So that's why I think it's really in everyone's best interest to support this kind of conservation work.
Wildlife management areas serve a crucial role in preserving and conserving some of our most endangered native species. On River Creek Wildlife Management Area in South Georgia near Thomasville, efforts are underway to restore a population of red-cockaded woodpeckers, once abundant in Georgia, but now a species in peril.
A huge part of what we do is support conservation for the red-cockaded woodpecker, which is a federally endangered bird. At one time there were anywhere between 60 and 90 million acres of longleaf pine, so they were certainly very common birds. And their populations today have dwindled down just to a handful of mostly public properties, mostly federal properties like national forests and National Wildlife Refuges. One of the very important tools is the ability to create artificial cavities. By creating cavity inserts, which we basically climb the tree and cut out a block of wood out of the tree and actually insert a nesting cavity into the tree. And we can also create drilled artificial nest cavities. Both of those techniques have been used to increase red-cockaded woodpecker populations throughout the range of the bird.
These researchers are working at the Wade Tract, a privately owned conservation easement in South Georgia.
The Wade Tract is one of the very few properties where we know that very little timber harvesting has ever taken place. It is one of the very few examples of old growth longleaf pine that we still have in the southeastern United States. And we owe a huge debt of gratitude to the landowners that have maintained and had the conservation ethic to maintain these properties for so long.
Private citizens can consider placing a conservation easement on their property. A conservation easement protects the conservation values of their property in perpetuity, but allows them to still own, manage, and enjoy the property.
Whether on your own property or visiting one of the hundreds of public properties we have across the state, there's plenty to see in Georgia's great outdoors. So get out and discover it for yourself.
Funding for Georgia Outdoors has been made possible by a grant from Mary Hall Singleton and by the Imlay Foundation.